Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Newmark. As you know, we're going to jump right into this video. I'm actually on a time crunch with the recording of this video, so I'm going to keep it shorter, maybe, even though this week's material is super exciting to me. I'm very enthusiastic about it, and I have a lot to say, but I won't be able to say it all. Okay, so uh, we're going to talk about Bolter and Grusin's remediation, but I'm also going to mention Hassett, which you read for this week, and the Diátaxis documentation composition framework. So I didn't have all of that on this slide, but oh well. Okay, so Bolter and Grusin. So let me just tell you, Richard Grusin is a mentor of mine. He was a professor of mine in grad school. He's remained a mentor of mine over these last 20 some odd years since then. He's now retired from University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, but he actually was like a 19th century American literature professor, and he migrated into like new media studies. He was his last position was as I said, at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and he initiated some really interesting like humanities consortium and studies of the Anthropocene and of arboreal geographies, sorts of projects there, which are really abstract, but nevertheless really connect to this work he was doing on new media and connect to his work on 19th century American literature. So you can explore him more if you wish, but whether he's a mentor of mine or not, this has been a very, very important book, Remediation, and it is referenced in writing studies in many different areas. So while it's rather old now, it still continues to be discussed. So I hope you enjoyed reading it. Anyway, so from the preface, the concept of remediation in its infancy is basically a concept related to repurposing. So new technologies such as the fictional wire, as he discusses with some movie stills in the chapter, are designed to efface themselves, to disappear from the user's consciousness. Can you think of how this occurs today? I mean, there's a very obvious example, and it directly extends or emerges from the example that he uses in the text of the wire, this virtual reality device. Many of you have probably used a VR headset for something, whether it's game playing or whatever else. I mean, I've actually never used a VR headset, but the purpose of using virtual reality is to make reality virtual, to efface the tool itself, to efface the VR headset so that you are engaging with a space as if, or an environment, a digital environment, a conjured gaming environment, as if you are there. So the technology is effaced. It disappears from your consciousness unless it's so cumbersome and uncomfortable that you can't help but be reminded that it's there. But that is one of the drawbacks of the way that VR is working today, as far as I understand it. So Grusin and Bolter make this claim about digital technology, and it is still true today, but maybe it was even truer in former eras of non-digital technologies. So digital technologies are proliferating faster than our cultural, legal, and educational institutions can keep up with them. Well, indeed, with the digital technology that is artificial intelligence and tools like ChatGPT, certainly those kinds of technologies are proliferating faster than our cultural, legal, and educational institutions can keep up with. All of you who are teaching at UNM as TAs, you certainly are having to like adapt very much on your feet to this changing landscape. So they're talking more in this case, certainly it could enfold within it artificial intelligence tools for either text composition or image generation. But they're thinking more of image related technologies. So they use an example of a webcam in the chapter, and I included a webcam here on this slide of Helsinki in the city center. Like you could see what it looked like there. We have a cabin in southern New Mexico. Sometimes I used to look at the village's webcam to see like how bad the snow was before traveling down there. So it gives you the opportunity to see a view from a distance that you wouldn't be able to see with your eyes. So that is an example that they use in the 90s, and that's even become even more profuse now, especially with these sometimes perniciously used technologies like live streaming on Facebook or on YouTube, where the actual distance, the physical distance, and the technology aspects, like the technological interface, is actually evacuated, and it makes it feel like you are engaging with somebody in real time when, of course, you are very distant from them through the mediative interface of the screen and for all of these other temporal spatial reasons. Okay, so Grusin and Bolter argue that modern digital technologies aim for the medium itself to disappear, leaving us in the presence of what we are, as it were, experiencing. Like, oh, I look at the city center in Helsinki and I'm like, okay, I kind of feel like I'm there. I mean, I'm not really there. I'm sitting in my office, with a lamp shining at my face because my overhead lights aren't working very well. But I'm constantly reminded of where I am. That technology doesn't yet enact this miracle of having the medium itself disappear, but we're constantly trying for that, right? So their central concept is this double logic of remediation. Our culture wants both to multiply its media and to erase all traces of mediation. So ideally, it wants to erase its media in the very act of multiplying them. Okay, now this is what I'm super, super excited to talk to you about. So I'm gonna try to move this little thing here. Okay, so, I'm a big fan of ABBA. You may or may not know ABBA. I mentioned to some of you in your scrapbook comments that I'm a big record collector. I'm a big fan of music of all kinds. I've been collecting vinyl records for a very long time. But, it really runs the gamut, the styles of music that I like. I really like ABBA, the Swedish pop superstars of the 70s. So here they are. Here's a picture of them in the bottom left of your screen in their basically present age. This is from a few years ago. And here they are in their 70s. So it was 45 years ago that they were in their heyday, more than that, actually, 50 years ago. And they are still such a global phenomenon, much beloved by many, that the income generation of all things ABBA just keeps perpetuating. It just keeps developing. And so you may not have heard of this, but they have a purpose-built theater in London. I would love to tell you all about it. It's really, really fascinating. It's green built, eco-friendly, can be constructed and deconstructed and moved, but it's this mammoth facility. I was lucky enough to be able to go there in person in April, and it was truly mesmerizing and fascinating. But one of the most uncanny things about it is the way that these senior citizens, right, constantly innovate, even today, with in particular Benny and Bjorn, the men on the side, who've been continually involved in musical theater and music production and innovation ever since ABBA began. They decided that they would collaborate with some film technologists and digital animation folks from Hollywood on creating these avatars of themselves, which in fact are called avatars. And so you see here on the bottom left, the technology that was used in these suits that they wore over the many, many years that were involved in creating the spectacle that is ABBA Voyage, which is the name of this performance. It's more like a Broadway show, kind of, in that you sit in the audience and you watch this quote unquote band play. It goes night after night like a Broadway show. It's not like, maybe it's like a band in residency, like in Las Vegas or something. But anyway, as Grusin and Bolter write, musicians and film and video directors take great pains to achieve the sense of liveness. When MTV first started, music videos became this huge phenomenon. Then sort of the next step was these live concert videos, which is a really interesting phenomenon too, because you're not there, but you're reliving the concert experience. And like Taylor Swift's theatrical and Beyonce's theatrical release of their hugely successful concert tours became something that you could participate in the context of a theater. So if we think about this quest for immediacy enabled through technologies that mediate and thus create a hypermedial effect, we can think of how ABBA Voyage fits into this dynamic. So the Voyage technology uses this innovation from the 1860s called the Pepper's Ghost effect. And you can look it up. I encourage you to do so. So to use another quote from Bolter and Grusin, they are all attempts to achieve immediacy by ignoring or denying the presence of the medium and the act of mediation. So I haven't even really told you what happens in ABBA Voyage, but it is an ABBA concert. You see Agneta, Anne-Fried, Benny and Bjorn in their prime. They are conjured before your eyes as if they are real and moving. The porousness of their skin, the undulating waves of their hair, the glitteriness of their clothing, all of it is generated in front of your eye in a way that suspends belief. It is truly like magical. And that is what a magician, as in this case, Pepper's ghost shown on the screen, is trying to enact. Something that suspends your ability to truly, really understand what you're seeing. And what I was left with after seeing this performance was like this kind of like powerful melancholy, because you see them before you in a form in which they will never die. Like the mortality of the avatars is infinite, or the immortality is infinite. They just can persist in this digitized magical rendering before our eyes, when nevertheless, since the 1970s, the rest of us and they themselves, we've all aged. I mean, I was born in the 70s, so I've aged, right? 50 years on, they too have aged 50 years on, but nevertheless, what you're seeing before your eye tricks you into believing that you are really seeing a rendering. And I think it's an amazing representation of this concept of remediation. But I have gone on long enough about ABBA, but I'm happy to talk to you about it more. Okay, so digital visual media can best be understood through the ways in which they honor, rival, revise linear perspective painting, photography, film, television, and print. So no medium today, and certainly no single media event, seems to do its cultural work in isolation from other media, any more than it works in isolation from other social and economic forces. So I have some screenshots here of Madcap, Flare, and Jira interfaces. If you were working as a technical communicator for a big technology company, you would engage with these all the time. This probably would be, or a DITA interface would be what your company used. So the graphical user interface, the GUI, for personal computers uses the desktop metaphor. We've talked about this before with semiotics, which has replaced the wholly textual command line interface. So what we're seeing here in these like sort of GUI interfaces here, graphical user interface, that like you can intuitively figure out how to use things, how to drag and drop. Well, we can now because we've been taught to do it, but this is not the computer code that exists behind it in the command line. So it is supposed to assimilate the computer to the physical desktop and to materials such as file folders, sheets of paper, an inbox, a trash basket, etc., that were familiar to office workers in a sort of a pre-digital context. So because I have to wrap this up, I'm just going to jump ahead. So I asked you a question last week about mirrors. I have just this totally zoomed out version of all of my photos from like 2025. They become this sort of amalgamation, an eye-blurringly bizarre fusion of these images, which in fact mirror my life, what I was doing in 2025, what I've been doing. So there's a long history of rendering the world as made up of a multiplicity of representations. This is the multiplicity of representations of my life for this year. So there's a long-held artistic fascination with mirrors, windows, maps, painting within paintings, and written and read epistles. So I asked you about mirrors last week, so we have new concepts of mirrors this week. We call the representation in one medium and another remediation, and we will argue that remediation is a defining characteristic of new digital media. I'm wondering if it was also a defining characteristic in some ways of pre-digital media. What do you think about that? Okay, so I don't have time to really go into this right now, but I'm just gonna gloss one quick thing from Hassett. I love how he just really quickly synthesizes these basic rhetorical functions of document design. So if you think about this in light of these concepts of remediation and mirroring, I'd love to see what you get. Finally, Diátaxis. I'm fascinated with this. Next time I teach the documentation class, I'm going to dwell on it much more. I'm not going to go into this right now because I don't have time in this video, but I will leave the slide deck link in the YouTube comments so you can go in and you can read this a little bit more. Please visit the Diátaxis website and see what you think about it. What I have here is actually a quote from a Reddit forum, and you can see it on the slide deck in the notes. Visit that Reddit forum because the creator of Diátaxis, who used to be a software developer for Django, he talks about why he created it. And then there's some really interesting comments from people who have technical communication degrees, and they're sort of inquiring as to why this is such a novel approach. So it's really interesting. So, all right, that's all for this week. Have a great rest of your week.